we say welcome. Hi, I'm Hannah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Maria? How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. We're recording on Friday, and Fridays are, I think, my favorite day of the week. It's just the expectation of something good coming.
Definitely. And we have got something good today because today we're lucky enough to be joined by the fabulous Anna Morgan. So thank you for joining us today. So Anna is the director of Red Shiny Apple Consultancy, and they offer specialized organizational training in development of equality improvement. And so she'll go in and do auditing of different companies and to see how they can identify best practice in terms of equality. So over 20 years of experience, she's worked in most areas of public sector, including the police, fire services, schools, governments, and many, many more. So she is an expert in her field. So we're very pleased and happy to have her here.
No pressure then, Hannah.
None whatsoever. Excellent.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah. Good. So, you really have worked in so many different sectors. But was it always your intention to get into this work? I mean, how did you sort of fall into the whole area of this equality?
Well, I fell into it. Is exactly what happened. So yeah, I didn't know. I think like lots of people, when they're starting on their career, they didn't really know what they wanted to do. I happened to be working for the police service at the time, and an opportunity, obviously uniformed service. I'm going back to the 1990s. So very male-dominated, uniformed service, a very strong organisational culture. But there was an opportunity that arose when I worked for South Wales Police, where it was an institution that delivered police training for police officers. They happened to advertise for support staff to put themselves forward to do the police trainer certificate. It's a nationally recognised certificate. So I put my hat in the ring because I wanted to do that sort of training. So I made an application. I went through the assessment centre. A whole group of us went through the assessment centre, and those that were successful were told so. I was told I was the top scoring candidate on the day as a member of support staff as well. So I was utterly delighted, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
As time went on, I saw all the police officers that were on the same assessment going to Bramshill Police College to do their trainer's certificate, but not me. And it happened to be one day when the Chief Constable of South Wales Police was delivering his regular update, and he asked if anybody had any issues they wanted to raise. And I thought, this is my opportunity to say something, but it wasn't the right forum. It was very public, and I think I would have thrown him under the bus if I'd have done it in that particular forum. So it was April the 7th. I remember it well. It was my sister's birthday, and I happened to be taking some cake over to the headquarters, and the Chief Constable came out on the doorstep, and I thought, now is my opportunity.
Perfect.
I approached him and said, I have an issue of inequality between police staff and civilian staff. And he asked me for a little bit more detail. So I explained I was a top scoring candidate. All the uniformed officers have been on this course. I haven't been allowed to go, or haven't been given that opportunity. And he said to me, get me a report by Friday morning, marked private and confidential, on my desk, and I'll have a look at it. So I did. 8 o'clock in the morning, the report was put on the Chief Constable's desk. I went off. I was delivering IT training at this period of time. And then I had a phone call to say that I would be going on the next available date for the police trainer certificate. It was really interesting. And then I was just absolutely elated. I was like, yes, this is fantastic. And I went back into the training program, and then one of our admin staff came out and said, superintendent's on the phone. He wants to speak to you. So I came out of the training course, And I answered the phone to the superintendent, and I shall never forget him. And he said to me, "My God, girl, you've got balls." I said to him, "Superintendent, I can assure you I have not."
I never have.
I'm never likely to have either. So yeah, so that was really how I got it. And so I got into doing the police trainer certificate while I was at Bramshill Police College, studying for my police trainer certificate. The chief constable happened to be on the premises, and I happened to be stood outside the canteen. These were in the days when I used to smoke, and I was having a cigarette outside. It's not when you want the chief constable to come up and have a chat with you, really. But he recognised me, and he came up and asked me how things were going. And it was at that point that I'd actually put in, even though I was still studying for my police trainer certificate, a job had come up in diversity training.
Mm-hmm.
And I put my hat in the ring for that, because I thought that's where I want to go. Yeah, so I'd put in for that in terms of diversity training. So yeah. And then I went for the interview for that, and then I got that as well. Fantastic. And then I went to Bedfordshire and did my race and community race relations training certificate, which was 6 weeks immersed in issues around inequality. So very moving, life-changing course for me.
Wow. What was so what was it? Why was it so life-changing? Can you remember what there was?
Yeah, I can remember Jerome Mack was the guy that ran that program. He was a great big guy, and he'd be in his big chair and his hands were like shovels. And he said, "There's 2 things you'll get from this course," he said. "Let me tell you what they are. One is the certificate. The other is an empty chair next to you in the pub, because nobody will want to speak to you." It was a training program that pushed you into the effective domain. It made you feel stuff. And when we do training around equality and diversity, you can teach around the equality legislation as much as you like. You can do the cognitive stuff. You can get people to understand the public sector equality duty and things like that. That's easy. But getting them to change their behaviour and get underneath their attitude is a completely different thing, which is why the methodology of using storytelling is so powerful in this area, because it touches people. It deals with the hearts and minds, and that's what happened with the Home Office Trainers course. Is it pushed you completely into the effective domain, you know, and if not handled well by a very skilled facilitator, could have been actually quite dangerous. And I don't say that lightly. We worked with a lot of Jane Elliot stuff, the equality champion from America. We worked a lot with her stuff. And I can remember I was away from home for 4 weeks on a residential course. I had a young baby, so I'd left her at home. I'd left her at home for 6 weeks prior to that, to the police trainer certificate. And the Jane Elliot stuff, I can remember. It was so emotional for me that I actually walked out of the classroom.
Wow.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's how you bring those people back then, isn't it? How do you bring those people and push them back into the cognitive? So that's why it was such a powerful thing for me. And I literally the whole 4 weeks was about listening to stories, watching stories, being pushed into that emotional state to feel something, and then the skill of facilitation to bring that back out, you know, to make sure people are safe.
Yeah, this comes up a lot, the whole, you know, the idea of the psychological safety. That's, you know, that's a vital part of work within inclusion and diversity. Yeah. And have you seen that where it hasn't been facilitated?
Yes.
Sure.
And it's not good. It's challenging, and it's very difficult. It's difficult for individuals. From an organizational point of view, it's potentially quite dangerous. You have to be really careful with that, you know, because you know, if you're inviting people to be pushed into the effective domain, you have to make sure that people can come out of it. I'll give you an example, if I may. It's typical of an organisation. They invite people for a training course. They ask them to fill in a monitoring form, to say age, gender, disability, etc. And, you know, I can remember working for a local authority, social services, ironically, of all the places, where they had arranged the training. I turned up to deliver the training. And obviously, when we're going through the programs around equality and diversity, I'd use a lot of video footage to generate discussion. And I'm a very animated person when I deliver training, so I'm all over the place. And I can remember seeing a woman kept going like this, going like that, and I didn't know why. And when it came to the coffee break, she disappeared. And the colleague that had sat next to her came up to me and said, "Look, I'm afraid my colleague has left and she's quite distraught." And I didn't know why. And he said, "She's hard of hearing." And she disclosed that on her monitoring form. And nobody took notice of it. And when I went to the manager and questioned the manager, the first thing that they responded with, well, did they disclose that on the form? And they wanted to see the form.
They didn't believe it.
No. Well, the first thing the manager should have been doing was running it out of County Hall to get her out of her car and take her keys off her. Pushing people into the effective domain, you have to be careful with that. Yeah. But if you want to change attitude and behaviour, it is the best way to do it.
Yeah.
That this happens, right? That these things happen so that we can make a change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because people have to feel these things. Because a lot of how we behave is based on our perception of things that are different. We learn that stuff. We learn it through lots of different vehicles, don't we? We don't actually realise. We don't realise what we've learned. So Hannah knows that I had a stroke 5 years ago, and my brain does it now, even though it's injured. But we make very quick decisions, knee-jerk reactions, gut instincts, our intuition. Gets us through the days, fight or flight response in terms of that. But I can remember the consultant coming and saying to me, "Anna, you've had a significant stroke." And I said to him straight away without thinking, "No, I can't have." I said, "I'm only 48. Because somewhere I'd unconsciously learned that stroke survivors, stroke victims are people who are older people,
Right.
It wasn't a rational response for me off the street telling a stroke medicine consultant who's an expert that he got his interpretation of my MRI scan wrong. But nonetheless, my brain worked very quickly to tell him he was wrong.
Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? How we just naturally categorize things, and we can easily just go, well, no, that can't be right because it's a woman, or no, that can't be right because it's only 10 or whatever. But it is, we do it, don't we?
The speed in which the brain works is fascinating. Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Fast and Slow Thinking. I don't know if you've come across that book. Around the brain's function and how quickly we go into this filing cabinet that we've stored all our experiences in, when we pull them out. Another example, more recent, just before COVID, I was going to do some work on unconscious bias training for managers. And it just goes to show really that none of us immune to unconscious bias and that learned behavior. I had some emails from a client. He'd come to me. I don't remember working with him before, but he'd remembered me, and he'd come to me, wanted some unconscious bias training for managers. I'm going to do a day in Birmingham and a day in London, and then the pandemic hit. So I'd only ever spoken to Charles through email. I'd never actually visibly met him. So after weeks and weeks of shifting the platform from face-to-face to virtual training, when he came on to introduce the programme, he put his camera on, and there in front of me was a white male. And I thought, good gosh. For the first time, I thought, good gosh, why am I surprised that he's a white male? But I was really gobsmacked.
You were?
I was absolutely floored. Because I thought he was Black African Caribbean. And I don't know why I thought that. I thought that's just bizarre. Why would I think that?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I had to do a lot of searching, Maria. Lots of searching. I'm thinking, why would I think that Charles is a Black African Caribbean man? And when I delved into the depths of my filing cabinet, and I had to dig deep, my first job was on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. And the leader of the band's name was Charles. African Caribbean. I had an implicit association with the name Charles. And he's the only other Charles really that I've had an interaction with. It was really bizarre.
Names are quite interesting in our association, because if you're at school, whoever the school bully was, maybe her name was Kate or whatever, then every other Kate that you ever meet in your future life, you'll always make an association between the two of them, even though they've got nothing in common, completely different personalities, completely different experiences in life, but there's always that sort of connection.
And that's why Sally, my daughter, is called Sally, and that's why my daughter's not called Rhiannon, which is an interesting thing, because when my niece was then called Rhiannon, that caused me a little bit of problem. Now that's not a rational, logical way of thinking. Just because Rhiannon wasn't a pleasant individual in school didn't mean to say my daughter would turn out to be unpleasant if I called her that. Nonetheless, it was a very real sifting process for me, and there was no way she was going to be called it. So when Rhiannon was called Rhiannon, if you look at confirmation bias, where we dismiss information that comes to us if it challenges our initial bias, that's problematic, because what I was looking for was more evidence to reinforce the fact that all Rhiannons are not nice. My Rhiannon, my niece, is lovely. But it takes a lot to overturn that confirmation bias. It takes an awful lot, because the brain and our psychology doesn't want to be proven wrong. We just don't want to be wrong. We think, we are good people fundamentally, but we do get things wrong, but we don't want to accept that. So we look for supporting information to say, I told you all Rhiannons are horrible. But I couldn't do that with my niece, because she did turn out to be lovely.
But I imagine that's sort of something that you come up in against the barriers in your training, that you've got people in front of you that just feel, why am I doing that? I don't need, I'm not racist, I'm not homophobic, I'm not. But yeah, I imagine they probably are, as we all are on some sort of level. Yeah, and from varying degrees. When I worked in the police service, people would say to me, I've been sent on this course. And this is my name, this is where I work, and that's all you're going to hear from me for the next few hours. And then within an hour, they're talking to you, they're spilling. Because everyone's affected by unconscious bias. It becomes, when you start to talk about the stuff around unconscious bias, what happens is people have the shared experience. Then they start to recognize, other people have said to me in housing areas, will say to me, I don't know why I'm being sent on this training course. I haven't got any of this. Because the implicit association with the word bias and the negativity and the hideous sort of labeling of being called bias, people don't like it. And then, very quickly they're like, oh my God, I have. And it's that realization. And that's when, particularly in training, is how we manage that uncovering of unconscious bias. It needs to be done so sensitively, because fundamentally we are good people. We don't like, it's uncomfortable, that learning experience. That's why, when we do the storytelling about it, they feel uncomfortable about it. That's the whole point. Because actually what we're having is a realization, that light bulb moment is, oh my gosh, I never realized. The beauty of that, there was the opportunity that you think, well, I'll give you an example. There was one of my trainees, if you like, one of my participants said she very unfortunately had a diagnosis of breast cancer. And she told me, she was sat in the waiting room. Obviously, when we have unconscious biases, if we're under pressure, we're tired, we're exhausted, we tend to slip up with stuff more frequently. So you're more vulnerable to leaking unconscious bias in those situations. She was clearly very nervous. And there was a gentleman in the waiting room, and she asked him who he's waiting for. And she said, as soon as I asked him who he was waiting for, I realized that I thought he was waiting for his wife, not because she had, because she had breast cancer, same as she did. She said as soon as she asked him the question, she realized she had an unconscious bias there. And he said, I'm waiting to see the oncologist. I've got breast cancer. And she said she felt dreadful. She said she felt she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her. She was mortified that she'd asked that question with the unconscious bias.
And it was interesting because I asked her, would you ever make the same mistake again, though? She said, never. And the reason she wouldn't is because she felt so awful.
Yeah.
So she very quickly had a very quick learning experience. That she felt. And that's the point, isn't it? I think, when you're talking about storytelling in this arena, that's the beauty of storytelling, because people feel things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's priceless, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, it's that ability to hear someone else's story and emotionally we can connect to that. Feel like we've never had that same experience of asking a man in the doctor's waiting room, but we've all had that experience of going, oh God, why did I just do that? So that emotion, we can emotionally connect to it. So it allows our brains to open up to be much more empathetic and understanding. Yeah.
And I think for me, Hannah, it's this notion that, fundamentally we are good people, but we have to have that level of acceptance. Is, sometimes we get things wrong because we are human, even though we think we're squeaky clean and we're really good at what we do. I worked with somebody this week. She's a counsellor in a local authority. And by her own admission, she would say, I'm a real advocate for equality and diversity. I'm always flying the flag for embracing diversity, recognising difference. And, I'd like to think that I always do that. And lots of us will say that, won't we? And what she said was, her daughter came out as being gay. And she said, I really struggled with that. For 6 months at least, she really battled with lots of stuff. How did she not know her daughter was gay? Why was she responding so, in such a sort of challenging way when she was an ambassador, if you like, of equality and diversity? She really struggled with that a lot. And it was a very powerful story to tell, because here's somebody who, on the face of it, believes that they're a person that embraces diversity. And even at that level, she found it really difficult to accept that from her own flesh and blood. She does now, but it took her a lot. Yeah. And then it was about working with a group to say, what if somebody doesn't have that initial starting position where they have a positive response to equality and diversity? So if you've already got somebody who is homophobic, for example, and their child comes out to them, how might they respond?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very powerful learning experience this week. And it was very interesting because one of the people who were responsible for homophobic behaviour actually said, oh, I'd like to think that I wouldn't do that because I've got 2 sons, and if they did, I love them anyway. I said, yes, but this counsellor felt exactly the same way. So I understand you'd like to think that's what you would do. But what we like to think about what we would do and what we would what we actually do, there's a disconnect.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful. Yeah.
Very powerful. And I have a question. So you said you do many trainings or to managers, unconscious bias, diversity, equity, etc. Some of them are really not happy. Let's say it's uncomfortable. You've said this. When is the moment when they come to you? When it's gone too late? When some homophobic action has taken place? What are moments that they say, well, now is a moment I need to do this training for my organization?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, it's a great question. A lot of it is reactive. Yeah. If I'm honest with you, a lot of it is reactive to situations that have taken place. Mm-hmm. So recently I had somebody who I was called in to do a piece of work where a member of staff worked there for years, very institutionalized in the local authority, very good at their job. I'm not saying that they're not very good at their job. They are good at their job, but they don't know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a member of, she works in birth, deaths and marriages registration. She does predominantly registration of deaths. So not a particularly happy environment, quite a tough environment, I would suggest. Yeah. But she had a member of the public come in who had dwarfism, so a person of small stature, came in to report a family bereavement. She dealt with him 100% professionally, not a problem at all. However, she then went into the office. And when she went into the office, she reflected back on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and her upbringing, her learned behaviour, and proceeded to behave in that manner in an office environment where she felt that that was okay.
Wow.
Okay. She wasn't challenged by any of her colleagues, even though her manager was in the room at that time. So the manager had the opportunity to do something at that time. They didn't. They took it away and they wrote a formal complaint. It should have been dealt with in the office. It should have been dealt with there and then. Instead, it was escalated. She ended up with a one-to-one micro teach for me. None of the rest of the team got the benefit of the learning and development, yet they could have done with it as well.
Absolutely, especially as no one stood up and spoke about it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, our organizations are the organizations that I work for in the main part are very reactive to behaviors. If they had asked me as an expert in this field, you know, what would be my recommendation? It would be for the whole team training, you know, not singling one person out, because actually there's a lot of shared learning to take place, you know, from all team members. So, you know, that would have been my approach. I don't necessarily think that the approach from this local authority was the best one. However, I do work with other organizations. So recently been working with an organization who think they're really good. They would like to think they're good.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you why they think they're good. They got loads of policies.
Aha. Yeah.
Loads of policies. Honestly, I've never seen so many policies for a relatively small organization. So they wanted an inequality health check. That's what I would call it. So let's go in. Let's have a little look. Let's look at all the policies. So we do an approach where we do a desktop analysis of all the policies, the relevant policies, the connected policies. And once we've done that, we organize a visit. And the visits go in to have a look at how psychologically safe do members of staff feel in the organisation, because you've got lots of policies here, you know.
Absolutely.
What's the reality? Because we see what's on the shelf, but what we want to know is, what does the culture look like? And it's very revealing. Very, very revealing. In fact, when you use virtual platforms and you offer females who are interviewing or having conversations, that's what we call them. We didn't call them interviews, we call them conversations. Women asked for women in particular. They wanted to do it on virtual platforms because they didn't want the open office environment with windows and people seeing, oh, so-and-so's gone in there to speak to them. I wonder what they're saying. So people felt safer to have those conversations. So this is an organisation who was very proactive, Maria.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm understanding this. Yeah.
Yeah. So to write a report for an organisation based on your findings of whether the culture is psychologically safe, bearing in mind significant number of people had left the organisation because they were autistic and the organisation doesn't get it. Yeah. And it was very upsetting. And again, you know, it's that, how do you manage that feedback to develop an organisation who says, we do want to learn, we do want to develop, we do want to be better, but we think we're really good. And when you start to uncover stuff, and actually there's a lot of room for improvement here, because your perception of your organisation, because you have a lot of policies, isn't the reality of what we're hearing.